Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Bruce. I never thought a random Instagram reel would end my marriage. But there I was, standing in my bedroom, watching my wife when I asked her a simple question. The towel she was clutching suddenly seemed like the only thing holding her together, as her face went completely white. That's when I realized the social media experiment I decided to try wasn't going to end the way I thought it would. Beatrice and I had been married for many years when this incident occurred. We weren't newlyweds anymore. The butterflies had settled into contentment, the way most marriages do when you've shared enough mornings over coffee and evenings having dinners together. We still spent time together, still reached for each other's hands during movies, still felt that little flutter of happiness when the other person walked through the door after work. It wasn't the passionate romance novels are made of, but it was real and comfortable. Our daily routines had become comfortable and predictable over the years. I would leave for work each morning around 8, and Beatrice would head to her job at the local library, where she worked as a research librarian. We would typically reunite in the evening, share dinner together, and spend our evenings reading, watching television, or working on various household projects. Weekends were usually spent on a mixture of household maintenance, social activities with friends, and relaxation. We had developed a rhythm that worked well for both of us, and while our life might not have been exciting or adventurous, it felt stable and satisfying in its own way. One morning, I woke up with serious back pain. I decided to stay home, but after my wife left for work, I got bored and decided to knock off some tasks. Working from home always felt like a small rebellion against the usual routine. Instead of my typical construction site visits and client meetings, I was camped out in our spare bedroom with spreadsheets and project timelines scattered across the desk. Around mid-afternoon, after wrestling with budget calculations that weren't adding up the way I needed them to, I decided to give my brain a break. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through Instagram, the way you do when you need 5 minutes of mindless entertainment. That's when I stumbled across this relationship reel that had apparently struck a nerve with thousands of people. The creator was asking viewers to share stories about discovering their partner's infidelity, and the comment section had exploded with responses. I should have kept scrolling or gone back to my spreadsheets, but I found myself drawn into reading story after story. I found myself reading through the responses with a mixture of curiosity and entertainment. Some of the stories were genuinely funny, describing elaborate schemes that had backfired or misunderstandings that had led to humorous revelations. Others were heartbreaking accounts of betrayal and the devastating impact of discovering a partner's infidelity. The responses covered a wide range of discovery methods, from finding suspicious text messages and emails to catching partners in lies about their whereabouts. Some people described hiring private investigators, while others had stumbled across evidence by accident. A few responses described confronting their partners directly with suspicions and getting unexpected confessions. One particular response caught my attention and stuck in my mind as I continued reading. Someone had shared that they had discovered their partner's affair by asking a simple, direct question at an unexpected moment when their partner was caught off guard and unable to prepare a careful response. The technique was remarkably straightforward. Instead of presenting evidence or making accusations, this person had simply asked their partner how long the affair had been going on, as if they already knew about it and were just seeking details about the timeline. The assumption embedded in the question had apparently caused their partner to confess immediately rather than deny the affair. I found this approach intriguing because of its psychological simplicity. By framing the question as if the affair was already known, it created a situation where the guilty party might assume they had been caught and choose to confess rather than maintain a lie that they believed had already been exposed. As I read more responses and thought about this particular technique, I found myself wondering how Beatrice would respond if I asked her such a question. The thought was initially just idle curiosity, but it began to take on a life of its own as I considered the possibilities. I want to be clear that I had no specific reason to suspect Beatrice of having an affair. There were no obvious warning signs, no changes in her behavior that had raised red flags, and no evidence of deception or betrayal in our relationship. My interest in trying this technique was more about testing whether it would work as described rather than because I genuinely believed my wife was unfaithful. But as the day progressed and I continued to think about what I had read, I found myself becoming more curious about how Beatrice would react to such a question. Would she be confused and ask what I was talking about? Would she be hurt that I was implying she might be unfaithful? Or would there be some other response that might reveal something I didn't know about our relationship? By the time Beatrice's normal workday was ending, I had decided that I would try the technique that evening. I told myself it was just an experiment, a way to test whether the psychological approach I had read about would work as described. I expected Beatrice to be confused or perhaps mildly offended by the implication, which would confirm that she wasn't hiding anything from me. When Beatrice arrived home from work that evening, I greeted her normally, asking about her day and sharing some details about the work I had completed from home. She seemed relaxed and happy, describing some interesting research projects she had been working on at the library and mentioning plans for the weekend. After catching up for a while, Beatrice mentioned that she wanted to take a shower and change into more comfortable clothes for the evening. This was part of her normal routine after work, something she did most days to help transition from work mode to relaxation mode. She headed to our bedroom while I watched. I waited for about 10 minutes after Beatrice had gone upstairs, giving her time to gather her things and start her shower. Then I quietly followed her upstairs, positioning myself in our bedroom where I would be able to see her when she emerged from a bathroom. I could hear the shower running in our ensuite bathroom, and I used the time to prepare myself mentally for the question I planned to ask. I was still expecting this to be a harmless experiment that would result in confusion or mild offense from Beatrice, followed by an explanation of what I had read online, and perhaps a laugh about the absurdity of the situation. When I heard the shower turn off, I waited for Beatrice to step out of the bathroom. I wanted to catch her at a moment when she was relaxed and unprepared, just as the technique I had read about suggested. The bathroom door opened, and Beatrice stepped out wrapped in a towel, her hair still damp from the shower. She seemed surprised to see me standing there, but not alarmed or suspicious. She smiled and was about to say something when I interrupted her with the question I had been planning. I looked directly at her with what I hoped was a serious, knowing expression and asked, "How long has this been happening?" I tried to keep my voice calm and matter-of-fact, as if I was asking about something I already knew rather than fishing for information. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Beatrice froze completely, the smile disappearing from her face as if someone had flipped a switch. The color drained from her cheeks, and her eyes widened with what looked like genuine panic and fear. I watched her face with growing shock and disbelief as I realized that her reaction was not confusion or offense, as I had expected. This was the reaction of someone who had been caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing. The technique I had read about was apparently working exactly as described, but I was getting results I had never expected to receive. For several seconds, we stood there in complete silence, looking at each other across our bedroom. Beatrice seemed frozen in place, apparently trying to process what I had asked and figure out how to respond. The guilt and panic in her expression were unmistakable, and I felt my stomach drop as I began to understand what this meant. I was shocked when Beatrice finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, as she said that she could explain. The words hit me like a physical blow, because they confirmed what her initial reaction had already made clear. There was something to explain, something she had been hiding from me that my unexpected question had exposed. I watched her for several more seconds, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. The wife I had trusted completely, the woman I had believed was content in our marriage, was apparently guilty of something serious enough that a vague question about its duration had caused her to offer an explanation rather than express confusion. Finally, I managed to ask her to explain what had been happening. Everything about this moment felt surreal and disconnected from the reality I had been living in just minutes before. Beatrice's explanation came out in a rush of words that seemed to tumble over each other as she tried to confess and justify her actions simultaneously. She told me that she had been having an affair with someone I knew personally, someone whose name made the betrayal even more shocking and painful. The man she mentioned was Gregory, someone I had considered a friend for several years. He was married, and the four of us had socialized together regularly. I had trusted Gregory, liked him, and considered him part of our extended social circle. Learning that Gregory had been involved with my wife created layers of betrayal that were almost impossible to process. Not only had Beatrice violated our marriage vows, but she had done so with someone who had been welcomed into our home, someone I had trusted and considered a friend, someone whose own wife I cared about, and who would presumably be devastated by this news. I was shocked by both the confession itself and the identity of the person involved. The revelation that our social circle included people who were deceiving their spouses and conducting secret affairs made me question everything I thought I knew about the relationships around us. Beatrice continued talking, trying to provide context and explanation for what had happened, but I found it difficult to focus on her words. The fundamental reality that she had been unfaithful was overwhelming enough without trying to understand the details and justifications she was offering. She described the affair as a recent development, claiming it had only happened once and that she had immediately regretted her actions. She insisted that it hadn't meant anything significant and that she loved me and wanted to preserve our marriage despite this mistake. But even as she spoke, I found myself questioning whether I could believe anything she was telling me. If she had been capable of conducting an affair with someone we both knew without my having any awareness of it, how could I trust her claims about the frequency or significance of what had happened? In the days that followed, the psychological warfare was brutal. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Every shared meal tasted like sawdust. Every moment of silence stretched into an eternity of unspoken accusations. I'd catch myself studying her face when she thought I wasn't looking, searching for signs of guilt or deception that I'd somehow missed for however long this had been going on. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake listening to her breathe beside me, wondering if she was dreaming about another man, if she was comparing us, if every touch and kiss had been a performance, while her heart was somewhere else entirely. Work became my refuge, the one place where I could focus on problems that had actual solutions. But even there, colleagues started asking if I was feeling all right, if something was wrong at home. Apparently, the emotional turmoil was written all over my face in ways I couldn't control or hide. The fact that Gregory was someone I knew personally made the situation even more complex and painful. I found myself replaying conversations and interactions we had all shared, looking for signs that I had missed or moments when their connection might have been evident to someone who was paying closer attention. I also worried about Gregory's wife and whether she knew about what had happened between her husband and my wife. The thought that she might be living in the same ignorant bliss that I had been experiencing was troubling, but I wasn't sure what obligation I had to inform her about what I had discovered. My relationship with Beatrice during this period was characterized by cold, distant interactions that bore no resemblance to the comfortable partnership we had maintained for years. I found it difficult to engage in normal conversation with her, and physical affection became impossible given what I now knew about her involvement with another man. Beatrice seemed to understand the gravity of what she had done and made various attempts to rebuild our connection and restore normalcy to our relationship. She was more attentive than usual, more affectionate in her attempts to interact with me, and clearly concerned about the distance I was maintaining. But her efforts to reconnect only highlighted the magnitude of what had changed between us. The easy comfort and trust that had characterized our marriage for years had been replaced by suspicion and emotional distance that seemed impossible to bridge. I found myself questioning not just her recent actions, but our entire relationship history. How long had she been capable of this kind of deception? Were there other instances of unfaithfulness that I had never discovered? Had our marriage been as solid as I had believed? Or had I been naive about her capacity for betrayal? After about a month of cold interactions and emotional distance, Beatrice suggested that we try couples therapy to work through what had happened and potentially rebuild our marriage. She had apparently been researching options and had identified a therapist who specialized in helping couples recover from infidelity. Initially, I was skeptical about the value of therapy for our situation. The trust that had been broken felt too fundamental to be repaired through counseling sessions, and I questioned whether any amount of professional guidance could restore the relationship we had once shared. But Beatrice was persistent in her suggestions, and I eventually agreed to try therapy, partly because I wanted to be able to say that we had exhausted all options before making any final decisions about our marriage. I also hoped that talking through the situation with a neutral professional might help me gain clarity about my own feelings and what I wanted for the future. The therapy sessions were emotionally difficult, but also illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. Having a structured environment to discuss what had happened and explore our feelings about it provided insights into both the affair itself and the underlying dynamics of our relationship. Beatrice used the therapy sessions to provide more details about her involvement with Gregory and to express her remorse about what had happened. She described feeling trapped in the routine of our marriage and seeking excitement or validation that she felt was missing from our relationship. While I appreciated her willingness to be more open about her motivations and feelings, her explanations also revealed aspects of her character and our relationship that I found troubling. The fact that she had sought fulfillment outside our marriage rather than discussing her concerns with me suggested problems with communication and commitment that went beyond the specific incident of infidelity. The therapist helped us explore the factors that might have contributed to Beatrice's affair and discuss strategies for rebuilding trust and intimacy in our relationship. We talked about improving communication, addressing unmet needs, and creating new patterns of interaction that might prevent similar problems in the future. But as we progressed through several months of therapy sessions, I found myself becoming increasingly clear about my own feelings and what I wanted for my future. While the counseling was helping me understand what had happened and why, it was also helping me realize that I might not be able to move past the betrayal. The therapy process clarified for me that trust, once broken in such a fundamental way, might not be recoverable regardless of how much effort we put into trying to rebuild it. Every time Beatrice was late coming home from work, every time she mentioned interacting with male colleagues, every time she seemed distracted or distant, I found myself wondering whether she was being completely honest with me. The hypervigilance and constant suspicion that had become part of my daily experience were exhausting and unsustainable. I realized that even if Beatrice never betrayed me again, I might never be able to return to the comfortable trust and emotional security that had characterized our marriage before the affair. Through the therapy sessions, I also came to understand that my expectations for marriage included a level of loyalty and commitment that had been permanently violated. While some couples might be able to recover from infidelity and build stronger relationships, I was beginning to recognize that I might not be one of those people. The therapist encouraged us to take time with the decision-making process and to avoid making permanent choices while we were still processing the emotional impact of the betrayal. But as weeks turned into months, my feelings became clearer rather than more confused. I began to realize that continuing the marriage would require me to accept a fundamentally different kind of relationship than what I had thought we shared. Instead of the secure partnership I had believed in, I would be entering a marriage characterized by uncertainty, suspicion, and the constant awareness that my wife was capable of betraying me with people I knew and trusted. The effort required to rebuild and maintain such a relationship seemed overwhelming, and I wasn't sure that the result would be satisfying or fulfilling for either of us. The energy and emotional resources needed to constantly monitor and verify trust might be better invested in starting over with someone who hadn't violated the fundamental commitments of marriage. During one particularly honest therapy session, I was able to articulate what had become clear to me over the months of counseling. I was done with the marriage because I didn't believe I would ever be able to trust Beatrice again in the way that marriage required. This wasn't a decision I made in anger or as punishment for her betrayal. It was a recognition that some damage to relationships is too extensive to be repaired, regardless of the good intentions and effort of both parties. Beatrice was devastated by my decision. The therapy process had helped both of us understand the full scope of what had been lost when she chose to have an affair with Gregory. The divorce process that followed was sad, but relatively amicable, given that we had both come to understand through therapy that our marriage had been damaged beyond repair. We divided our assets fairly, maintained respect for each other as people, and avoided the kind of bitter conflict that characterizes some divorces. Looking back on the entire experience, I'm struck by how a simple question inspired by social media led to such dramatic changes in my life. The technique I had tried as an experiment had worked exactly as described, revealing information that I had never suspected and probably would never have discovered otherwise. The irony wasn't lost on me that my curiosity about whether my wife was having an affair, prompted by random social media content, had uncovered an actual affair that was happening right under my nose. The experiment had succeeded beyond my worst nightmares. I learned that sometimes the most devastating truths are hidden in plain sight, protected only by our assumption that people we trust are being honest with us. Beatrice's affair with Gregory had been conducted within our social circle, involving someone I interacted with regularly, without my having any awareness that anything inappropriate was happening. The experience taught me that trust in relationships is both more fragile and more important than I had previously understood. Once that trust is broken in a fundamental way, rebuilding it may be impossible, regardless of how much both parties want to make the relationship work. Today, I'm grateful that I discovered the truth about Beatrice's affair, even though it was painful and led to the end of our marriage. Living unknowingly in a relationship built on deception would have been worse than facing the difficult reality of betrayal and making informed decisions about my future. The woman who froze when I asked that unexpected question had revealed more about our relationship in that single moment than years of comfortable routine had shown me. Sometimes the most important conversations are the shortest ones, and sometimes the most revealing answers come not from what people say, but from how they react to unexpected questions about things they thought were secret.